Will you join me in prayer? Oh, gracious God, help us to become masters of ourselves so that we might become the servants of others. Take our minds and think with them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hands and work with them, and take our hearts and set them on fire with your Spirit. Amen. Well, after clinching a bold victory over the prophets of Baal, Elijah finds himself a hunted man. And since he was only human, he did a very human thing. He ran. And when Elijah had run out of steam and was run down and run dry, he prayed to God from the depths of his being, God, please, just let me die. I am so done. You know, it's said by psychologists that when we are emotionally activated, we have a tendency to make rash decisions. And that instead we should employ the acronym HALT. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? In this story, it looks to me like Elijah is flooded with all four HALT states at the same time. And this story got me thinking about where we are today as a country, as a society, because I think we've been in a prolonged, emotionally activated state. And by prolonged, I'm thinking years, at least since the pandemic and maybe before that. The sheer pervasiveness of injustice, like we just saw on that short video clip, and the willful ignorance of those with institutional power, you know, it makes it really tempting to want to run away to our caves. And so, in great part, I think that's why we are in the midst of what's being called the Great Resignation. You know, I'm just not going to put up with this anymore. I'm not going to dance in crazy town, whether that be personally, in our relationships, professionally. You know, I'm not going to collude with systems that oppress, whether that be through pay or other inequalities that we see. So much of people who are just quitting, I think, is about the recognition that they just don't want to be part of it anymore. So, but here's the thing, I don't think resignation can be a permanent state. I don't think it can be permanent. So what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to notice if we're in the midst of an emotionally activated state? Prolonged activated state. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to notice? Well, turning to our story, notice the healing, the wonderful healing that God sets before Elijah and also for us. First off, let's notice that God begins where Elijah is, not where Elijah should be or could be. And the same is true for us. God meets us where we're at, even when we're on the run from what God is calling us to be. And of course, what God is calling us to be is our authentic selves. So what a gift. God meets us where we are. And God's answer to this overwrought prophet who's emotionally activated. Well, God's answer comes in three distinct levels. There's the physical, there's the emotional, and the spiritual. And in the story, we discover God's grace. So we discover that God's grace always meets the whole person. What we see in this story is that God begins with the physical. And Elijah lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, else the journey will be too much for you." The first step in God's program of restoration from resignation is to feed him and put him to bed. Isn't that amazing? I would hazard a guess that a big part of Elijah's problems is that he's just simply suffering from sheer exhaustion, sheer weariness. He needs a good night's sleep. He needs a good meal. I think that much of our time when we are in resignation, the first step for healing then, as I see it in the story, is that we need to take care of our physical needs, right? And so it's just this isn't rocket science. I'm not saying something new here, right? But I think it's worthy of pointing out. Okay, we're in this extended state of being emotionally activated. So what is the first step? Let's make sure that we are intentional about taking care of our physical needs. The second step to healing is emotional. It says here in verse 8, and he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. Now, Horeb is Sinai. Mount Sinai is another name for, Mount Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. And that is where the law was given to Moses. So why go there? Why go there? Well, because Sinai is the place, now, listen, Sinai is the place of holy memories. Holy memories. Sinai stood forever as the reminder to Israel of God's providence and God's grace. So, how wise it is in this time of resignation to go to some Horeb when life goes sideways. When life is going sideways, go to your Horeb. He went back to the place which reminded him every stone, every rock, every cave of the mountainside, all of that was a reminder and spoke of a God who cared and a God who could do. The third aspect of Elijah's healing was spiritual. And God said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still voice. Now, what does this parable mean? Well, I think it reveals to us a lot of what's going in the mind and heart of Elijah, because you know what? Elijah hoped for a political earthquake that would overthrow the throne of Ahab and destroy the idols around. But no earthquake came. And then he longed for a searching, scorching blast of fire of judgment coming down and consuming the forces of injustice in the nation. But none of that happened. He was to learn that the still small voice of an awakened conscience is the most powerful force in all the world. And that's where God moves. Elijah had assumed, looking all around at the desolation, the bleakness of what was going on, he assumed that he was the last faithful person standing. But in that stillness, he came to understand that God never intended for him to carry the full weight of challenging the halls of power on his own shoulders. You know, the text goes on after this reading today. It goes on to speak of 7,000 more faithful ones. And before long, Elisha becomes Elijah's companion and understudy. How often we think we're alone when there's a whole community. There's a whole community out there waiting for us if we go on with the rest of the story. This Sunday is Juneteenth, the commemoration of the 1865 announcement to the last enslaved people in Texas that the Civil War had ended and they were free. The idol, one idol certainly that we're called and equipped to resist today is not Baal, the biblical Baal, but it does include the idols of white supremacy and institutional racism. And I understand, and I need to remind myself, yes, as individuals, we will grow tired with that kind of challenging, overwhelming idol worship. But remember this, hey, what's the rest of your story? What's the rest of our story? We don't go it alone. That's not how we were created. And we think about it, you know, if anyone could go it alone, it would have been Jesus, right? But he surrounded himself with a community, and that same community we're called to be a part of as his followers. Each of us, as a disciple, a follower of Jesus, has a vocation, a calling, and there are things that we are to do in this world, and the gifts that we've been given in order to do them, no matter what we perceive to be the challenges to be. Yes, if Elijah got discouraged at one point and even gave up, that's not surprising, right? We might do the same thing. But it's a blessing then that other voices intervene, however small, and call us back to who we are and whose we are and what we are truly about. And for that I say, thanks be to God. Amen.